Hello, hello, hello.
How are you doing?
I'm fine. How are you?
Pretty good.
Nice,
Can't
nice.
complain.
Not complaining. That's good. Nice one. By the way, I started the recorder.
Very good. And I
So
don't say anything silly anymore.
exactly. Actually, I was a small update yesterday or Wednesday. I was joining the Future of Text um, meeting, or more the
Yeah.
the progress, and yeah, it was interesting. They were basically deciding that. Which is a bit related to XRSH, but they basically decided to let go of trying to reproduce PDF perfectly in XR. So basically, just rendering it partially with Troika text and not caring too much about the exact layout of a page, but more about the content and navigating it.
Which is something I have done like long time ago and recommended. So I'm at the same time glad you're doing this way and a little bit disappointed. Would have been good to see, oh, they found like somehow a super trick and then it's all solved, of course. But yeah, I'm not surprised.
Yeah, it felt a bit like because also Andrew said that, oh, we actually had this in an older version. So I think it's one of these phenomenons that sometimes, if not everybody in the group understands the solutions to a problem, sorry, if they don't understand the problem, then they are also not understanding the solution to the problem, and then they still need to sort of experience it themselves, it seems.
Yeah, indeed, it's one thing to say what to do, and in order to experience the impossibility of not doing the thing that was not recommended. So it's I just for the anecdote, I don't know if you see from if my webcam works or not, but if it doesn't, I have a bunch of headsets behind me
Yeah.
because I give a workshop to kids tomorrow
Okay.
about programming and creativity, and I'm going to try to speak as little as possible and make them experience the pain of not programming as much as possible, like trying to make them struggle to control the TV without a remote, trying to make repetitive tasks, and
Uh-huh.
then prop up programming as a potential solution to some of those struggles. Because I think if you get the solution straight away, like, hey, programming will solve everything, first, is not true. And second, it's like, yeah, but it solves problems I don't have. So I think, yeah, they might indeed have had to go through those steps in order to see that, yeah, it's an actual problem.
That's a very cool approach. I haven't thought of that yet. To basically simulate or make them experience problems instead of telling an enormous story about how it's gonna be great to solve all the problems you will ever have, etc. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
We'll see if that works. I'm not sure. It's an experiment too. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's very interesting. I also immediately dive into a topic which I really need your thoughts on.
tell me.
Well, it's basically, and let me share my screen. I basically, it's actually because of one of your issues you wrote a while ago. I'm gonna share my screen here. My whole screen, yes. So I'm not sure which repository. I think it was this one. So you wrote an issue, and maybe the thing is, it's not exactly about this issue. It's more about what it made me realize. So here you said I tried to modify index to add hand tracking grab controls with grabbable on primitives, and but it showed no hands. So something unexpected happened, and of course I could just dive in and tell you a whole story. What kind of hoops you should jump through or what kind of bugs there are. But I also started to realize, like, wait a minute, this guy is an A-frame heavyweight, and the purpose of all of this is that it's easy to use. So, and you're mentioning grabbable, which made me realize also your hints about, for example, super hands. That basically there is a set of components or at least terms. So grabbable is a term, clickable, hoverable. All these things are already as a sort of phenomenon thought out. I felt a bit like so I was holding that view against this whole HTML inside A-frame thing, which is it is impressive, and it looks like it's starting to work. And but I was thinking about again this issue you posted, and I was thinking, like, how am I gonna fit a grabbable into this HTML code? With this example, I'm sort of promoting to code apps in HTML, but I felt a bit weird about this whole thing because I want to think in terms of grabbable, of hoverable, clickable, draggable, droppable, all these primitives, but it doesn't. It seems to go a bit against, this whole HTML inside A-frame thingy, and so I started to think. I started to basically compare. I don't know if you know the example on the left. Have you seen it? And it's completely A-frame markup, and it's surprisingly little markup. And there it uses only one component. It's called pressable. Pressable is also another primitive, which is a sort of like seems to become a bit of a gold standard. But I was comparing it to my on the right, this HTML solution, and then I was looking at what is needed for it, and I noticed that on the left we're going from HTML to A-frame markup, and that's it. But on the right, we're going sort of in a direction where if I have to, like, I want to be able to click a button, I want to be able to select text. But the whole issue is that it goes from HTML to A-frame, and then it starts to sort of work with HTML again to convert it to a canvas, which is then converted to a shader, and then it's sort of in your WebGL environment, and then can be raycasted. But the problem is, or I feel a bit dirty here and weird. It's like I'm losing so much information. I'm now in 2D pixel mode where I'm raycasting, and I need to reason backwards of, like, is this a button which is being raycasted or not? Like, something feels really complex compared to the left, where I really have access to everything, to the 3D objects, to the text, everything. And so what I want your opinion on, sorry for the long introduction, is if we basically want to have everything available in XR, which right now it isn't, because this menu on the right, like, it doesn't work in immersive mode. So I wanted to sort of refactor this into immersive mode, and then I was thinking, like, shit, and then I have to confine myself to HTML, and man, this is going to be very hairy. So my question to you is like, shouldn't we perhaps promote another way of creating apps using A-frame markup, and with max some missing HTML primitives? So, for example, I was thinking,
Okay.
yeah, why don't we just add some HTML attributes to A-frame markup? So basically the other way around. And I was even uh, I was even of prototyping on paper how that could look. So on the left you have HTML, which I basically don't want to use for A-frame mini apps, and on the right is what I was just thinking, like, is this something we could promote, like a certain easy way to create form like or dialogue like things in A-frame without having to deal with CSS or HTML markup or interpreting HTML like with this demo which I had here. So yeah, what are your thoughts on these things?
So first, my immediate thought is it's a lot to unpack, which lead me to my second thought. In that case, when it becomes a little bit too much for me, it's okay. How did we get there in the first place? And the motivation behind A-frame initially is bringing VR or XR, which is a completely new way to interact with a virtual world. So initially it was just VR, actually, not even XR. Because first of all, it's in 3D. And to make it easy for web developer. So like the target audience for A-frame or web developers that comes by the thousands, millions even. So very large audience. And go back to the time of, gosh, what was the name? Like web rings and really terrible design homemade websites, but like a plethora of them with unique content, not necessarily professionally made. So not, for example, React 3 Fiber kind of audience, not Unity professional game developers that already understand 3D or patterns like ECS, Entity Component System, but people that make 2D web pages with like, hey, this is my garden. In my garden, I made carrots. Here is a photo of my garden with the carrots, and a couple of tags there. So that's historically speaking, as far as I remember, like the motivation behind A-frame, and so that's also why there was desire to stick to HTML syntax and concept, and not complex one as much as possible. And I don't know if A-frame itself got a little bit lost along the way, if the component or set of components and the community did it really attain that very first initial goal or not? Is this still a relevant goal? All those, in my opinion, are, well, to be very honest, and it's going to suck a little bit to even say it aloud, but I don't like visit A-frame based sites, like news sites in VR on a weekly basis or even on a daily basis. Like, hey, here is, because again, that was kind of the goal, a plethora of websites. I see a couple here and there, and I remember like really cool ones, like the guys from like the Canadian studio, but they were professional studio that did like the mini golf and this kind of thing before getting acquired by Mozilla actually, and then fired again
Oh,
apparently.
really?
So Yeah, because they're part of the hubs team. So I imagine, I'm not sure, huh? It's
Okay.
just me who did use this, but I imagine that they were not Paradovsky, if I remember.
Yeah,
or
yeah,
something like
Brodowski with the golf
that.
golf game.
Yes, they did gold. They did like amazing hubs page or scenes and rooms with like superb 3D assets. So they were the one doing something amazing, and they were also clearly professional and even a team. So I would argue they were not the initial audience. So if I want to be honest, I think AFRAME in itself did not attain the initial goal of having. I think it was GeoCities, the bunch of websites that people were doing with. It's not necessarily a true failure in the sense that the web is not the same since the time of GeoCities. Like some people go on Glitch and make pages, but a lot of people they were. I don't know if they were happy, but at least they were. They were fine having like a Facebook page with their photo and whatnot. And I think it's very sad, but that's the state of play. That's actually what's happening.
Yeah, yeah.
So trying to unpack all this, not necessarily to be critical, but just trying to get the big picture. And I'm wondering, yeah, what's the here? What's the hope? Like, who is the actual audience that would use either such components, or even if they don't care of the component, but just like or not, they would care about the name, let's say grabbable, pushable, etc., without even understanding or wanting to understand the complexity behind it. Would they be wanting to actually have a responsive interface that works outside of VR, not just in VR? Would they actually be mostly doing it in VR? Does it matter to us? Or we were like, it doesn't matter because we want to explore the state of the art of interaction, and if nobody else used that code, that's, or if it's only people that are super dedicated to it or to this kind of exploration, that's also fine. I'm just saying this openly because I don't really know. I can share my view as an individual without caring for the audience, but I don't know if that's really relevant.
Yeah, well, perhaps a good question, maybe to completely go to the basics, is also this question. I will share my screen, which I also started to think about that. And the reason, like, I love to be pragmatic, but I also realize that this is a point where all the small components and apps we will be making in the future will basically be impacted by this decision, whether to go with sort of like HTML flavored mini apps or not. But if you, for example, enter this XR shell, so to speak, there's actually two modes, and so let me launch this. There's the 2D one, and there's the 3D one. And yeah, in case of the HTML Hello World demo, this one, then the 2D one is interesting. But if the majority of the apps will be used in VR, then it would be sort of a burden to write all these 3D dialogues in HTML, and you would rather then use A-frame markup from the start. So yeah, I was thinking a bit like the decision to start this sort of like entrance of this web page in 2D mode or in 3D mode already has high implications, because if you start in 2D mode, it gives a sort of this message of like, yeah, these mini apps will all be completely 2D and 3D compatible. But if you only start in 3D mode, then it could kind of go into the direction of like, no, this is really 2D apps inside 3D.
Yeah. So to backtrack a bit, what's the motivation behind using 2D here inside VR.
So that you can put on your VR headset and have all kinds of dialogues, use applications basically in VR or AR dialogues. Because normally,
they could be translated to 3D buttons or UI. Like if there is a small acceptable subset, let's say buttons and text and whatnot. Like if you go back to the Super Hands demo, was it Super Hands actually? Well, the A-frame demo with some interaction like pushable.
yeah,
it would be possible to also convert them to 3D assets or primitives.
yeah. So that
Like not all of them, but some of them.
So that was my idea as well. Like instead of this, basically embedding HTML code into a into some kind of component here, and promoting that, we could also just write some kind of separate translator. Could be even a single page website where you basically just if you can only think in HTML, you could paste in your HTML on the left, and then on the right it would basically generate some A-frame. So I was also thinking a bit about that, to basically promote components to use this kind of markup, the A-frame markup, and then also show that I don't know how, but it must be possible to also project that in a way which looks great on a 2D desktop, so that the camera is exactly in front of it, so that it looks like it's completely 2D. So I was thinking that maybe that is smarter and more flexible also to program with A-frame style than to for instance, stick to this HTML rasterized version and then have to manage that somehow. So yeah, it's just some thoughts I have, because like I personally feel a bit dirty. It feels a bit limited to make this. It's almost a bit like React Fiber, like that. It's like yeah, we're just gonna make it. You can make all kinds of custom components, and you will just everything will be reactive, but it will still be HTML. And I'm even thinking like maybe we should just go for A-frame markup, like also in the examples, and benefit from all these basically A-frame components, because this HTML code cannot really benefit from these existing A-frame components, because here it's just HTML which gets turned into pixels.
I'm trying to think of like who would be the audience there that would want, or not want, they would absolutely need to use, that would design, okay, they would start by, so they would design an app, and they would, so it's somebody who is aware that such a system of apps exists. They trust that system enough, let's say, to last longer than the time of their project, or that they would understand it sufficiently to maintain it themselves if they need, basically. Otherwise, no matter how beautiful or unique or performant, they wouldn't want to touch it. Like it's just too scary, basically. And then they would invest some of their own time to develop content for it. So they would ideally, I imagine, not want or have to rather understand the plumbing, how it actually works, they're like, oh, I get an app out of supplying a couple of relatively simple lines of code. Like they don't want to write something that's more complex than the underlying system, because otherwise, yeah, it's not really leveraging or benefiting, creating anything positive for them. So here they're like, oh, I get a UI that allows me to manage those windows with apps in them. And here the benefits would be so now they can't move windows within the space with hand tracking, or can they?
Well, right now they don't, but they can, but it's gonna require some more plumbing on our side, because as you mentioned in your issue, it's not that well, it requires a bit of extra plumbing on our side.
So I'm not trying to be critical about this. We're saying, oh, that's urgent, or it must be done before anything goes. I'm trying to evaluate, like, really who is audience there. Is it like Joe, and Joe is whatever years old, lives wherever, and they, so that I'm doing all this in order to try to assess the level of knowledge they have, or what they would benefit from using all this. And so right now, if it's not moving that thing in space, like what are the affordance with an app right now? It's the menu on the side menu, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
starting the app on the side, and I imagine killing it or managing it somehow.
yeah. Well, yeah. Actually, that is my exact first pain point. Is like I wanna recreate that menu in like so that it also works for 3D. So this sounds great because hey, it's HTML and I already created this hello world HTML thing which works in immersive mode. But the problem is that there's a lot of sacrifices which needs to be done. For example, these CSS icons don't work anymore, so it's a very shallow conversion. There's not this HTML to canvas, so I'm running into so much problems which I need to work around, which makes me think, well, if I have to spend so much energy on working around these problems and sacrificing the design and also deal with the raycasting thing that if I click on a button that it works and blah blah with my hands. I mean, it works for lasers, but so if I have to do all that work first before I can translate the menu, then yeah, I found it a bit interesting that this A-frame example on the left with these 4 buttons were so easy to. It's much easier to reproduce the menu in A-frame markup. So I was thinking then, well, maybe let's just leave this hello world HTML example as an example and not really, make it sort of the starting point for all kinds of immersive tools which will be needed inside to navigate this XR shell application.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I have some question marks, and it also I started to reconsider, like, is this HTML in Canvas? Is this like, how far should I go with this? Because it's a bit of a translation which will never be perfect. It will also depend on the browser how that HTML to Canvas conversion goes. So I was thinking to sort of take a step back before I start working on a lot of problems which I should not be working on, perhaps.
Well, I think the answer to this is like, what's the audience? And even if that audience is solely you, or you and me, or somebody else too, like a third person, or that's also okay. But it's a little bit like, is it an intellectually exciting problem to solve, or will it have, like, what will be the actual usage? So one of my egoistic interests with this a while ago, I'm going to step back personally this time, not on the history of AFRAME, but my own history with XR. My own goal is, and still is, managing my mind and getting more quality ideas thanks to this interface. And the basis for this, my data set, basically, is my wiki, and my wiki is in HTML. So that's why I've been like even lobbying for this, namely having a web page in XR for years now, since WebVR started, pretty much. So I definitely see. So my need for it is showing my HTML content in it. So it's very important to me. But I want to decouple this from somebody who is designing an XR app, and has some HTML knowledge, and that is ready to learn a little bit more to go further, because they don't have the same problem as like having, or some of my tricks were like converting using Phantom.js, like thousands of pages to an image. Not amazing, but kind of work up to some point. So there were some ways for me without all this. Of course, again, if I can have browsers or browser pages proper opened, which is kind of what I started doing with the Vision Pro. I'm cheating in the sense that it's in pass-through, or it doesn't really matter, but I'm not in WebXR. It's just the OS of Vision Pro that allows me through mostly Safari, sadly, but to make those pages appear. But I can't programmatically control them, so it's still not good enough. But like, I can see what properly rendered HTML content with readable text is, and I have to be honest, it's good. That's what I was hoping for. It's not good enough, but again, that's my own very specific need for HTML, and I don't know if that's something that should be promoted with XR Shell. Should it be making like a design statement that says, hey, your apps should be responsive, and for this, it's recommended not to rely on 2D HTML, but use like the AFRAME entities proper, for example, so that it's HTML-like in terms of syntax, and so it's easy for people who are web developers already to wrap their head around it. But it's also like, guys or people, let go of the traditional 2D HTML, because that's not going to be a quality experience, and not even, I don't want, like, innovative or something like this. Like, even the widgets themselves, is it the right metaphor in 3D? Should they be, is even a 3D button, does it make sense? Or should, for example, the sphere, box, and torus that you show on the left, should they be sphere, box, and torus, like the actual shape? And then, yeah, they don't never need the text anymore. They are what they represent. Dark mode could be like a gray thing. It could be like the analogy of a light bulb that is dark. This kind of things where it's an invitation to step back. Like, why are you even in XR in the first place? Sure, it's easier. I'm not even sure, actually. It's probably easier to bring back what you already know, namely buttons with text on them in XR. But is it actually interesting? Is it really creating something so novel and more intuitive, or whatever criteria used to judge it to be better? And I'm not convinced, to be honest. And again, it's a little bit ironic, because I've been asking for HTML and exploring, of course, how to do this in XR for a while now. But in terms of design of content, like it's the cheap and easy solution. It's not necessarily the better one.
I have an idea now because it made me think this. Like it's much easier to reason about being able um, to render an HTML wiki in XR than to reason about supporting HTML in XR, because that could be anything, and then there's always somebody like, hey, but why doesn't it support this particular feature of that tag, or like some kind of exotic thing? So that everybody has different needs, but maybe we could just draw. It's maybe easier to draw the line somewhere, like we focus on supporting HTML, rendering HTML, till it can sort of show a wiki and have perhaps some scrolling, because that is actually, a wiki is sort of a very bare minimum features. I can imagine it's just text, paragraphs, headers, links, and scrolling, and perhaps jumping to a fragment. So
Yep.
we could perhaps, like, next to this Hello World HTML example, which we could support, including the raycaster, up to the point that it can fully render maybe some HTML 1.0 kind of websites, like wikis and that kind of stuff, and call it a day and say, like, well, this is our focus, knowledge sharing, etc. And then we can also make another Hello World example, which actually converts these elements, HTML elements, not into not into pixels like with the HTML to canvas, but it just converts it to entities, like here. That could also be a sort of like, and then you have all three possibilities to write small apps. You can do it in the you can do it in the, let's say, the native A-frame markup. You can do it like just loading an HTML file, like a wiki, and that will be the HTML to canvas version. And the other one could be a combination where you basically but yeah, the question is if that third is even necessary. Maybe these first two these first two are actually enough. If I would just decide, okay, this menu, I'm just gonna recreate that menu using native A-frame buttons, native A-frame markup, and that wiki, for example, we're gonna use the Hello World HTML example as a starting point. Maybe that is already enough, and we don't have to make a choice then.
So, okay, let me imagine that Joe, the potential user of XOR not just as a user, but to build an app, wants to build an app tomorrow, not literally today, and that app counts how many times he clicked or he pressed the button named button. It's what's the name? It's a Skinner box. Voilà.
Okay, Skinner box, yeah.
Yes, he made the Skinner box app, and whenever he pressed the button 5 times, he gets or an unknown actually number, a random amount of times, he gets a reward in the sense of a torus. Voilà. That's the app. Which, to be honest, in terms of let's say making a young kid play, might still have value. So why not? And maybe he can use other apps in order to track usage or whatever. So not completely impossible to imagine. I would expect him to read the documentation that will give some suggestion on what's the preferred way. Recommending, let's say, is there more? Let me ask much more direct. Where is the tutorial to build an app today?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's a good question, because if you can already write code, well, first there will be a manual, of course, which are long and dry, and people won't necessarily, Joe doesn't want to read it probably. And then there is also, and there's also there's a terminal. There will be a terminal inside, so you can type things and read things, and perhaps even write some or see some example code which you can edit live. And the question then is, what would that look like? Would that be? It might trigger a familiarity response if that is a simple HTML form, where on the right you can actually see it floating in the air, this rendered HTML form. And you can see at the moment you edit it, you see like, oh wait, it's changing. Oh, that's cool. This is live coding. But yeah, it's a good question. Is that A-frame markup, or is that HTML code to represent that Skinner box torus app? Yeah, that's a good one.
And like, can you share a link on the chat about a tutorial like build your app today?
If I already built that, you mean?
Yes, build, or like a short document on how to build.
No, I just have a directory now with Hello World. Am I sharing, by the way?
Yeah.
I right now I didn't go for so right now in the app there is a manual. I think it's this coffee thing, or which one was it? This one, or I'm not really sure which it was, but there is a manual somewhere. Or maybe it's bugging right now. But there is a manual which is basically an HTML file with not much text in it. And I was thinking of using these Hello World examples as sort of like, oh, this I can just copy and then I can start writing. Still a lot though. But
so I would argue that that's for somebody. I mean, of course, I understand the beauty of it, that the system itself can produce more and grow. But I would argue that for somebody who's already convinced, so I would suggest to make a 5 minutes video where you actually do it, like a screen capture, and then you can add it on your channel. And then from this short video, a 1-page, 5-paragraph segment on how to do this, and then eventually where to store it if somebody else want to play the game and compose and share apps. Because I think the live example and the code base is for somebody who's already convinced. It's somebody who already both see the value and are sure that they are capable enough to make it happen. And I think short video and then simple like blog post with copy paste text and with the link obviously to the code base with example would help a lot. Like, just an anecdote, but I think some of the beauty of A-frame back in the day, or success even, and even of 3GS today. For 3GS, I don't know if you follow the account on Twitter, but like pretty much every day you see retweets of like beautiful project, and it's inspiring. It's like, wow, like I get a daily reminder of how amazing 3GS is and how a good bet it has been for me to learn 3GS. So that's super motivating. And of course, if you're the person who's getting retweeted, it's like, yeah, people know about my work, so that's super motivating. And AFRAME did this also with blog post. One of the first paid project I did, or actually the very first VR project that I did professionally, was retweeted by AFRAME and in the blog post and whatnot. And it's super positive for the framework because, like, hey, we have a community, and that community builds stuff. It's not just people of the framework themselves understand it and produce. Then that's what starts to create more components, which makes it more valuable for people either already in the community or that, they are a bit on the fence. So for something like this, and that the examples that are not just like, here is some, either dive right in or here is some code in your face, like this intermediary step of communicating how to make an app rather than a component here would help a lot in terms of onboarding. And I imagine, no offense, but you might feel, oh, it's not ready for that yet. But I would argue it's part of the iterative cycle that, it's not, I mean, at least in the sense that there is not everything you want there to be. But I think by doing this documentation, by having more potential involvement, then it's, on the track for this.
And that's a good point to realize that there is basically convinced users and not convinced users, and to start from the start with videos of building things and this iterative process, that is a very very good point. And I also experienced this, that the more you think of some kind of 1.0 release and then start posting content, that's way too late. Like, in hindsight, you could have produced much more content already. Yeah, thanks. You sort of untangled my brain a lot, especially I think especially sort of like drawing the line here. So I think I got a bit fatalistic about the HTML stuff. It's like, now I'm thinking, like, we can just draw a line that, if there is a user, for example, like you, who would already be happy with a simple wiki rendered and clickable and navigatable, then that is a good line to draw. And then it's not a reason to sort of like wipe it off the table. And it's totally fine to have two ways of creating apps. So it's a pretty broad discussion, but thanks a lot for these thoughts. Definitely good stuff.
Well, my pleasure then.
All right. Did you have any other thoughts or things you wanted to share as well? Maybe it could also be non XR shell related, but AFRAME or XR related.
I did, but I forgot since. So will be for another time. Give me just a few seconds to try to recollect. One thing actually that I don't know if you notice, but apparently the Oculus browser will provide an HTML overlay, or actually, you will, if I understood correctly, there will be. I'll check on the issue so that I can share a link and avoid saying something completely off.
Mm-hmm.
It was on the WebXR specs yesterday, a couple of days ago. I forgot, but if I understood correctly, is it so long ago? No. Maybe it was via another platform.
It's in immersive mode or only in AR for phones?
I think immersive. I think actually. Yeah. Okay, I got it. this way. If I say something wrong, there'll be the right. And the discussion, I think, basically, beyond my understanding, is valuable. So here is the issue. So a couple of days ago, relatively fresh, 3 days ago, so they called it control over overlay browser. So I think you can have a browser within your WebXR session, which you might not have some of the freedom I asked, which is actually to have multiple overlays you can position. I think this will be a single overlay that is right in your face. But in terms of having a 2D interface, like the widgets you were showing, or even a single wiki page for me, rather than a dozen of wiki pages you can move around, which again is my goal, or at least I think there is value. If it's not positional or spatial proper, then I don't think it's useful. But in terms of, if you have example where you need one single UI to go through buttons, or like they give example of you're in an immersive experience and then you need to use the card to pay for content, maybe using Stripe or something like this, I guess that's what you would rely on. Maybe that can also alleviate some of the pain points that you highlighted earlier.
This is pretty huge.
I thought you'd be interested.
Because I gave up on this. To be honest, this surprises me. I kind of gave up on this. I know this issue of, well, there's some other big issues about HTML in or overlay browser in immersive mode, and I kind of gave up on it because there were so many people pushing back because of security reasons, and I'm a bit surprised that this just happened. So this is pretty. This is a game changer.
Well, yeah, even as I said it, when I mentioned, a payment with Stripe, I was like, this is the opposite of what was discussed at the WebVR first workshop in Samsung HQ in 2016, because they were worried about the Chrome UI of the browser being hidden and thus not being able to do quote unquote serious things like transactional banking. And this indeed changes all that. I think it's because my hypothesis is they played with first that they imagine there is a need, and that second that or not imagine, I imagine they got request rather for this, in that they did the overlay itself for 2D textures couple of, maybe a year ago, I forgot, which is very much in your face, but works. So they had time to technically experiment with this. So I bet that's the consequence of those two things, and it's huge. And at the same time, that's why I reply on that issue. It's not good enough for my own egoistic use case, and I got a better outcome with the OS of the Vision Pro, which let me position such windows in space. Because if it's a single 2D overlay, then it's a quick hack to do a quick payment, and then you go back, let's say, to immersion. It's not an actual object with affordances except within it. So it's huge, and at the same time, I would argue it's not huge enough. It's a cop-out, or it's some kind of partial solution. But you go back, it's like you're in the web, and then suddenly you have your virtual mobile phone appearing. But like in a fixed position, it's still very limited, and you can only have one also. So huge, but not that huge at the same time.
It could be huge for this project we're doing, because if we get the HTML window, up to a point where it can where you can select text, for example, or even do a simple forum post, and still just simple HTML 1.0, which is going to be incredibly performant because it will be basically just an interactive image. That would be it. And then, for if you want I think if you can copy paste and also in that HTML overlay, then you have at least one sort of powerful real browser and sort of the
I'll stop you there metaphorically and and literally, because I got to go in 3 minutes. And you're widely speculating. No offense, but as far as I know, we don't precisely know this kind of limits. Can we actually do anything? Can we even click in a known position, or is it? I hope so. I just don't want you to get too hyped on question marks, because,
Okay.
like, indeed, that was also my first reaction, and that's why I asked right away, like, can I do this? And their answer right away was like, no, you can't, and you won't.
Oh.
So maybe copy paste will be possible.
Uh-huh.
Maybe even this will not. Maybe it will be very like single input, maybe
Okay.
not controllable with a mouse or keyboard. I don't want to sound negative, but yeah, I've been burned before. So, but please do participate though to that issue, because they then better gauge interest from actual developers that will rely on it.
Awesome. Well, that's my call to action then now, and then I will let you go for now. And then thanks a lot for your time.
My pleasure. Have a wonderful day and a lovely weekend.
Yes, you too. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.